This is the Police Training HQ podcast. We are your headquarters for all things training and resources for Texas law enforcement. And welcome back to the Police Training HQ podcast. Happy Sunday. And episode 13, we've got a treat for you. Before we get into it, Mike and I, we want to send our thoughts and prayers out to the Kerr County area and the victims, first responders, families that are affected by the Guadalupe River rising 26 feet and the tragedy that it's caused. Our thoughts and prayers go out to you. We want to send our unwavering support.
Absolutely.
For this episode, the reason it's a treat, something that's been in the works for a while, we have a guest and an interview today. Our guest is a longtime public safety leader. Malcolm Jackson is a 40-year law enforcement, fire, EMS. He's been around it all. He's worked for the city of Watauga and Southlake. He's also, where I've known him from, is in the academy. He's been a leader of the Tarrant County College, Texas Police Academy there, where the program was recognized as a statewide model by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement at the time. To me, he epitomizes professionalism, where he's committed to high standards. He doesn't stop there. He also served on the accreditation team for the Southlake DPS, the first public safety agency in Texas to achieve accreditation in both police and fire services. He has connections to both the International Association of Chiefs of Police Advisory Councils and the ILEA Command College, both well-known and renowned institutions. And he served on the councils there for small departments for 3 years, the Ethics Council on the Institute of Law Enforcement Administration, and the Center of American and International Law. Where I know him is used to make me a little nervous because I had heard some stuff about him in the past. But I've known him as an ACE. That was an Academy Contract Evaluator. And if you split Texas in half in any direction, it's still a lot. And he was one of two that covered half of Texas, which is insane. He did a good job of not complaining about it. And I believe he'll probably correct me. He also started that program. I think helped launch the first statewide Academy Evaluation program. He is a master peace officer. He's an advanced instructor, firearms instructor. He's an ethics trainer, crisis intervention trainer, and a mediator. He holds degrees from SMU, master's degrees, and he's also got an academic recognition award from TCOLE. And then he enjoys camping, motorcycling. He's going to go on a vacation. I was going to make fun of a vacation, but I just got back, so nothing I can do or say about that. I've called him Sarge for the better part of 10 years, where I met him at a TCOLE conference. But this is Mr. Malcolm Jackson today. We've got a great interview lined up for him.
Good morning, guys. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for. I know you're on the start of vacation yourself, and I know this is cutting into your prep time. Mike,
I've known Malcolm a long time, and I know him as boss. It's hard for me to move away from that because he was my boss at Tarrant County College, and learned a lot from Malcolm, and we're very happy to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thanks. Again, it's a pleasure to be here and an honor, I must say.
That's awesome. I've got questions. I've got too many to fit within our podcast time, so we're not gonna use all of them, I promise. But I am truly excited. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while. I think I wanted to start early, if that's okay. How did you yourself start, or just what was your motivation for public safety? Was it a childhood dream?
It's really kind of a unique story. My father and I had an automotive business back in 77. We actually had a facility that had 11 double bays. We could work on 22 cars at a time for both automotive body and as well as engine repairs. And some folks stole some tack, some horse saddles and bridles and that sort of thing out of our barn. And Hearst Police Department detectives couldn't locate it. And I said, no problem. We're going to get with the Cattle Raisers Association. We were members, and we'll get them to work on it. And they agreed to take the case. And I said, I want to go. And they said, you can't. And I asked, why? And they said, because you're not police. So, well, how do I become one? And so they said, contact Bedford PD. So, okay, I did. And they had a reserve academy go on the next week, and went down and filled out a 2-page application. They ran a criminal history, and paid my $30 and went through a grueling police academy that was 80 hours
Oh,
long. And it was stage 1 of 3 to become a police officer. And once I got involved, I realized I was spending more time volunteering my time on the reserve program than I was working at the shop. And I told my dad, "You got the shop. God's called me to this career." And that's how I got into it. And I've never looked back. Never looked back.
80 hours. So what were the other phases? Were they all 80 hours at the time?
No, they incrementally went up until you totaled, I believe it was 260 or 280 at the time. You had to have a total of 280 hours and different levels of reserve status. And then you became a basic. And then once you became basic, you're full time. So
Wow. Mike, did you go through something similar? I know you went in the 80s.
Late 80s. It was in 3 sections that were longer. I think the academy had gone up to somewhere around 400 hours at that time. But yeah,
Wow.
it was similar. What I did like about it is you could go to work after that first section. It's almost like real-time FTO while you're in the
that's
academy and then going back to the academy to learn a
Yeah.
little bit more.
I
on-the-job training.
That's
Well, I won't get
correct.
into it now, but I wrote. Mike made a mistake years ago when I first met him, and he asked me to write down all the thoughts I had, and so I did on this. I don't know. I don't even know how you read it, to be honest. It was just word vomit. But I thought the modeling of the academy could be cool now if we allow some of the cadets to get out there and experience life during the academy. That's really awesome. At the time, and I think that was 1978. I don't want to presuppose. Was that 1970s, the late 70s, Malcolm, that you went through the academy?
77 is when I went through the reserve academy. And then a year later, I went through the main academy. Yeah.
I didn't know this, and I haven't told Mike this either. It just hadn't came up. But my grandfather tried to join the police department in our hometown in 1973 and complained that he had to go through an interview. He thought they know me over here. They just need to give me a car so I can go patrol. It was
Yeah.
hilarious. Yeah, then he was mad about an interview. Well, as you look back for 40 years, and I know 40 years, some of it includes TCOLE, which I'm going to ask you more specifically about. But is there any moments that stand out to you reflecting back on 40 years?
Yeah, besides the concept of me transitioning there into the public safety arena, both through Watauga and Southlake, there's 2 real changes outside of that and TCOLE. And one was Wise County Sheriff's investigation. My partner and I discovered that the sheriff and chief deputy were involved reportedly in some unethical traffic. We did our own in-house look at that, and we discovered that, in fact, there was some stuff, and had to work with the feds and the Texas Rangers, and ultimately wound up with having to prosecute my sheriff and chief deputy while my dad and my sister worked at the same agency, and I couldn't let them know what was going on during the course of that investigation. So I learned a great deal about ethics and the challenges there. And then the second major thing was my daughter's homicide. I actually made my daughter's homicide scene there in Wise County and worked with the Texas Rangers for over a year on getting that solved, and then going through that process. Well, being now a crime victim and understand the victim's compensation program and going through that. And then, of course, several years later, there was the death of my grandson involved in a DWI case that involved his dad, who was the driver at the time. And those 3 things really kind of shaped how I approached ethics and training. They all had an impact on that. So take something negative and make something positive. That's what you got to do.
Wow. Yeah, and I know, especially, well, for our listeners' benefit, it sort of reminded me of one of your auditing sort of techniques, which was you would ask me a question and I would give you an answer, and then you said, "All right, now come up here and sit on the stand and testify." and you put me in a scenario where I was on the stand testifying, but of course I didn't know about those life events. I think I recall some of it, and I'm so sorry to hear that. But it doesn't surprise me at all that you turn that into something that will help others. I mean, when those things happen incrementally, I mean, did you know, other than all the other grieving and all the other processes of dealing with something that tragic. Did you feel like, well, I'm gonna turn this into something I can use for my job and my love, which was public safety at the time?
Well, my entire life, thanks to my mom and my dad, was to take adversity and try to convert it to something positive. And really did with my daughter's homicide. Not only did we establish the program there at TCC for the scholarship fund, but I had the opportunity to educate district attorneys through the Texas District Attorney County TCAA. Had the opportunity to speak to them and educate them on crime victimization, because many of them really don't fully understand that program, and it's as sad as that may be. But so you seize those opportunities when you can.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. Well, do I dare ask from your time? So we were talking before we went live that you were sort of forced into doing fire, police, and EMS. I don't want to give it away, but it sounded like you had an aversion to you wanted to do police. But how do you think you being a firefighter and EMT simultaneously? How do you think that affected your career, or did it, that sort of diversity of professional
Oh,
professions?
it absolutely it changed my perspective. Originally I said I'm not going to fight fire. I'll fight bullets, but I don't fight fire, until you went to the academy and you realize fire is quite predictable. People are not. And it's like, well, man, I should have looked at this earlier. But you do get a different perspective. You take a look at different angles that you wouldn't otherwise have known. So your perspective in life and leadership and in training is all different. And I'm going to give a shout out to my fire guys. I'm just going to tell you, for all the police trainers that are out there, rely on and lean on some of your fire trainers, because they are exceptionally skilled at training. And I think what you're seeing now in TCOLE is an adoption of many of their levels of professionalism. And so kudos to the fire service for doing that. And kudos to TCOLE for stepping up and trying to make a change for the positive on the training aspects as well. But it just gives you a different perspective on things, and you start to be able to tap into resources that you might not otherwise have access to.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe the fire services model for the way that they finalize a course, where they require you to take an exam, but also perform
That's correct.
skills. I think that's where Mike and I are certainly going in our own program for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my dad used to say the proof's in the pudding.
Oh yeah. Well, I can't show the listeners, but Steve Caudle, who we were talking about earlier, who wound up being a good friend of mine, he was teaching me how to inspect a ladder. And I bonged my head on it, and he made me bow to everybody, which I thought was kind of weird because it made that gonging sound. But during my evaluation, I hit my head on it again, and he winked at me. He said, "You got this." But in later on in my career, I actually had to inspect ladders for my chief, and I mean, it definitely, there are skills that you need as a young officer and a young firefighter.
Did he make you go lay down in the recliner after? Isn't
No,
that the
rookies were not allowed
reputation
to
of
lay on the recliners.
no recliners and no flat screen TVs?
No, this is back, I think, in the hazing days, which I was more than happy to accept, because I was told that if they didn't haze you, they didn't like you. They actually put a cot with my name on it next to the recliner, next to the captain's recliner, so
Oh my!
he could keep an eye on me. So I had to sit down on a cot next to my chief to watch TV.
Wow.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I cried a little bit, not a lot. Well, I wanted to take your time to TCC, Mike. You worked for Malcolm and worked with Malcolm there. I wonder, do you have any questions from your time there or for the program? Because I know that you guys you set a really high standard at the academy there. I mean, the program was widely known.
What I remember the most is Malcolm's leadership style is empower you and let you do your job, but hold accountability. One of the things that I took away from just being there and being around Malcolm and the coordinators is it's systemized and process driven. And with that, you are never scrambling to be ready for audits or whatever term you want to use there. And so that sort of approach, I think, is what helped me when I went to Hill, is I wasn't reinventing a wheel there. I just sort of scaled down the wheel a little bit. It's a smaller program, but I know just being able to have that model of kind of what you want to do and how you want to act and how you want to, kind of present yourself as a director. Certainly, I owe a lot to Malcolm for that, and I appreciate my time there. I thought it was, excuse me, very beneficial. I'm not getting choked up like about to cry, but
Yeah,
uh,
it's very meaningful.
I think that just the approach that he took there, I guess, in putting that system into what it was, a system, was a big part of why that program's such a success and continues to be today. I think legacy, I think about that when I think back to my time in policing, is some of the stuff that I put in place leaving policing, I think is still being used, and it still makes you feel good,
Yeah,
to know that you contributed to an organization or the profession, or in our case, in a training environment.
yeah. That's awesome. Malcolm, do you have any memories of Mike's when you were time there?
Well, let me tell you, I was so blessed to have the team that we had there at TCC. And let me kind of back up for just a moment. When I learned that there was an opening there at Tarrant County College, I called Ted Phillips, who was the director of the program there, and said, "Hey, well, what's the odds and opportunity of me coming on?" He said, "Well, they're good. You just have to go through the process." And once I got in there, I realized, oh, there's a lot of stuff involved in running an academy. And so we brought in a great team. And I'll tell you, the program at the time was struggling to make 7 students each class. And I was told, you got to fix this. You got to bring in more students. I said, okay. So we started identifying the problem and we recognized, hey, there were people in that academy program that were convicted of drug use. There were convicted felons. And I called Kim Vickers with TCOLE and said, hey, why aren't we allowing them into the academy? We've got to change the rule. And he said, oh, they can't be in the academy. They can't be licensed. I said, no, Kim, it's they can be in the academy. They can't be licensed, but they can still go through the academy. And the chiefs from the local agencies would not allow their police officers to train next to people who were convicted felons. And I understood that. And so I called Kim and said, hey, we got to change this. And he said, wow, I had no idea, didn't understand that. He said, you write the rule. So I actually wrote up the draft and sent that to Kim Vickers. And as a direct result of that, that's why you have many of the standards in TCOLE to get into the academy program, not just to be licensed, but to get into the academy program. And then we brought in folks like Mike Hughes and Scott Donaldson and Rafael Perea, who were all there. And those are the ones that put that program together and made it successful. Went out and talked to the chiefs and said, what do you need? What do you want? How can we make it better? And we listened to the client. We listened to the public and gave them the free rein and said, let's test it. Let's make it work. As Mike pointed out earlier, you just take those risks. And if it doesn't work, we modify and change and go forward. And as I look back on it now, you take a look, those guys are all running separate academies. I mean, Scott Dawson out at Collin, Mike at Hill, Raphael still at TCC. So it was an opportunity to build leaders for other programs and expand that. And I was so blessed to have that team.
Wow, yeah. Mike, or is the check in the mail?
Yeah, yeah. No, I can't express enough what spending time in that environment has done for me professionally, and I think it's like that pay it forward. You you know
Yeah, absolutely.
when you can move, if you choose to move from where you're at, it should be to probably help grow another program. So I think
Excuse me.
that's one of the biggest things that I take away from that.
Yeah, and for the listeners' benefit, and I've said this openly, I'm blessed to work for Mike in the same way that because I mean his standard of hiring instructors is very high, and I didn't know this. I mean, I have confidence, but not enough to say, he let me come in and teach arrest, search, and seizure, which is his baby to begin with, and our relationship is really founded upon his trust of others, but then also empowering. I mean, he kind of lets me go full range. And so his leadership style and Malcolm, your leadership style is the reason I is very, it sort of is the same. And Mike has high standards and very, very easy rules to follow. So as long as you're producing, he's off your back. So I can see where you get it, or at least how that's shaped. And in my time at Weatherford, Malcolm, I wanted to draw the attention there. So you were at TCC for however many years. How many years was that?
I believe it was a total of 8.
8 years. That's right. And then you went to TCOLE, and you were at TCOLE from 2014 until you retired. And I don't know when, I guess that would have been 2020-ish, right before the pandemic and right before that snowmageddon. I had a frantic call to you, and I said, "Hey, I've got a class." At the time, we were very close to being put on probation for first attempt issues. And I said, "How do I prepare my students for the test? I mean, what's the optimal level?" And you said, "Well, here are a couple numbers to call." And there you go. I knew you as a person, just to kind of to move forward, because I've got some other questions outside of your professional life, but you had such a high standard of, what do I say? You wanted success, but when Mike said empowerment, at first, to be honest with you, I was like, man, he is tough. You said, well, call them, you figure it out. I mean, that's kind of the way it felt. And I at the time I was like, well, geez, how many Ben Franklins do I have to spend? I wasn't sure what to do, but then I realized that it's almost like you had it scripted. When you started at TCOLE, it sounds like you had a lot to do with the changes that were made with officer standards, academy standards, and things of that nature. I recall it from my time. Most people in our area, you would you were known as an auditor, but I don't think that's fair. Knowing you now, I think you were more of a resource, frankly. But from your time at TCOLE and all the changes that you helped make, were you hired there to start that and start things like the ACE program?
No, not originally. And kind of give the listeners a short history. I actually hired on as TCOLE after I retired from Tarrant County College. And so I retired from municipal service, and I realized that after at least 5 years, I was vested at Tarrant County College, and I could then draw a second retirement check, and I did at 8 years. And I went to work for the state, realizing that as long as I worked there at least 5, I could pick a third retirement and get insurance for the rest of my life. So that was the motivation to go to TCOLE. And I hired on as an investigator. At the time, they had an investigation division that they were starting up, and there was a lot of police officers that were going to jail and prisons for everything that you can imagine. And so I was involved in the investigations aspect of that. And during that process, we realized we really need to take a look at, why is this happening? Why are we making so many arrests? And the arrests were listed, the convictions were listed in the newsletter from TCOLE. And so we started analyzing that, and I went to Kim Vickers and said, okay, here's what it is. Most of these folks that are getting in trouble should never have been allowed in the academy in the first place. And so we've got academies that are not holding their feet to the fire, either on the front end, or they're not holding to the standards that are set out by TCOLE. And he said, how do we fix it? And I said, give me 3 guys, and we'll split the state up, and we'll do inspections and support training for the academy coordinators. And he said, I'll give you 1. So, well, I'll take what I can get. And so myself and Mike Dickey developed the program and said, what is it we need to do, and how can we best approach this? And my administrator, Richard Gutierrez, there, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of leaders in my life, from Billy Campbell to him, who have made a difference. And he was one that said, All right, what are you going to call yourself? Well, you should never give me that latitude. Because Mike Dickey and I came up with the Academy Contract Evaluator so we could be called an ace, and that the name stuck, and that's where it was. But
That's
our
awesome.
objective was really to go out to the academies and educate them on what the rules and the law were, and then to explain to them the importance of holding that standard. They became the gatekeeper. And over time, we made some real headway in that. And Mike is still involved very heavily in that with TCOLE. But once I reached my retirement eligibility at 5, which is what I told him, I'll give you my best 5. I got 8 to 10 in me, but at 8, I retired and turned it over to Mike and moved on to other things.
Well, yeah, and my director of DPS, Steve Malley, at the time at Weatherford, I asked him. I said, "Okay, so these audits, I've only ever heard, and it's not fair, just for the viewers, or I'm sorry, the listeners' benefit. It's not fair, but I've always heard that it's a grilling." And I had been on the stand a bunch. I was like, "Oh, we can handle this." And it's not so much a grilling as it was accountability. Your job was to make sure academies weren't John Wayning from the hip,
That's
the
correct.
rules that were set in. As you see TCOLE's role in oversight in that way, I think a lot of officers may have a misconception of what it means to have a commission that has oversight. Do you want to? I don't know if there's a Reader's Digest, or if you want to go into that, but why is the oversight from the commission's perspective, at least? Why is that so important for the state's training functionality?
Well, I think you can look at it and compare it from a macro to a micro perspective. When we get stopped as individuals by a police officer, our heart rate goes up, our pulse goes up, our blood pressure skyrockets. It's the, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble kind of perspective. But the reality is, from the cop's perspective, is hey, I'm out here to help you. I want to educate you why it's important not to run the stop sign. I want to educate you in the importance of not speeding or putting the seatbelt on. How can we help you? That's really the attitude of officers. And TCOLE is that same way. If you have a regulatory agency come in, I don't care what regulatory agency it is, there's always that fear factor of, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in trouble. But the reality is that TCOLE is there to help and to assist. They are a resource if the agencies will use them. Those field agents and ACEs out there are truly wanting to help guide and direct and assist in every way possible. It was that way my entire tenure, and I can tell you, in talking to Richard Gutierrez and Mike Dickey and some of the other guys on a regular basis, that's still TCOLE's attitude. If you call them, they will help. Now, if you cross the line, it's just like a police officer on a citizen. And you cross the line, you're going to pay the price. So that's the whole objective, is to follow the guidelines and then use them as a resource.
Yeah, and there's definitely freedoms in that too. I mean, agencies that you take a rule and then maybe find a way to comply in with technology or whatever. But I mean, there's a very basic understanding of oversight that's set out when you take over an academy or when you teach or coordinate an academy. How you do that though can, I guess be up to you. There's a lot of freedoms that I don't think officers understand. That yeah, there's regulatory oversight, but you have freedoms to comply in ways that as long as it meets it or exceeds it, in that way.
That's
I
correct.
think, I think there's a lot of misconception in that way. One of the questions that I pondered on, and it's because I hear it all the time, and I know, I mean, I hope you don't mind speaking on behalf of TCOLE. I'm not asking anything that's disparaging at all. A lot of officers, you sit around a coffee table like we always do, or by the water cooler, and you'll hear the phrase, "I wish TCOLE would just do this. I wish TCOLE would change this," or whatever. Do you want to give a version for the listeners of what it actually takes, either legislatively or interdepartmentally, to actually make changes at TCOLE?
Yeah, that's one of the real misconceptions about TCOLE, is that TCOLE can just come in and do what they want to. They can make a rule, they can suspend a rule. But remember that all of it is legislatively driven. The Texas legislature says we are directing TCOLE to set the standards, and then TCOLE has to set the standards, but they can't just set standards. they have to be directed by some legislative act. And so it's really the legislature working with the commission to say, what is it that we need to do or can do or should do? And then working collectively with the different associations, from the Chief Police Association, the Sheriff's Associations.
Hmm.
And those organizations working together change the legislation, and that legislation then allows TCOLE to do certain things. When you look back at the Sunset Commission and the changes that the Sunset Commission rolled out, it's going to make some real differences, some positive differences at TCOLE in our ability to utilize data more efficiently because they've expanded that operation. And then you got the advent of organizations like IADLIST, and I'm going to give a shout out to them, the International Association Director of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, working so closely with TCOLE now. When you look at the database for officers that have been in trouble in Oregon or Washington State, now they are the gatekeepers. And so TCOLE now has incorporated that into the hiring processes and standards. So it's a collaborative effort, but the end result is that it makes our profession a true profession. And so kudos to those that have worked so hard for so many years to help see
Yeah.
that through.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I'm sorry. I am hogging these questions. Please step in whenever you have questions. I got too excited and I'm over here talking for half an hour already.
You're doing a mighty fine job. Just kind of keep on rocking and rolling there.
Well, thank you. When he agreed to do this, I sat in my office at my house, and I'm sure my wife didn't see me for a few hours because I was jotting notes down. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hog. Yeah, the other, if you don't mind, from your time there, what was your motivation? I think I know the answer, but I want to ask it anyway. What were your motivations to create and sort of, I guess, make more professional our law enforcement entry standards? Was it other states, or was it just something intrinsic that you felt like needed to change?
I think it goes back to looking at what is it the community expects of the officers. I didn't grow up a nice guy, and I don't say that in any negative light. I was a rebel rouser. Most of the officers in Hearst PD knew me because I drove fast cars and I raced on the street a lot, and they knew me on a first name basis. They didn't mind calling my dad and saying, "Hey, we caught him out here again doing this. You need to correct him." And
Hmm.
so because of that, I realized that we need to be professional. And I really have pushed at that a lot since then, and have had some great leaders that allowed me to do a lot of different things. Just seize those opportunities to transition from one stage to another where you can make a difference. And once you've made the positive difference, you look for other opportunities. So just press on.
Absolutely. When it comes to officer standards, I don't know if you've done research in this. So if this is not a fair question, please let me know. Where do you think Texas ranks as far as the U.S., as far as our officer standards? I mean, do we have room to grow there?
I think there's always room to grow, but I'll tell you that Texas really is one of the leading states when it comes to standards and professionalism. And interestingly enough, I had the great opportunity to work with ILEA, the International Association of Law. The oh my gosh, my brain just went completely to
That's all right.
International Law Enforcement Administration.
Yeah.
Institute for Law Enforcement Administration, Alea. Greg Smith would be screaming in the background if he could hear me right now. But I had an opportunity to work with Greg there at Noble, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and he and I did a presentation there talking specifically about the changes. And so we went back and looked at the data, and anybody that wants the research that we did on, you want to copy the presentation, I'll be glad to provide it. Just send me an email at mwjackson1@yahoo.com, and I'll be glad to send it to you. But what I found startling in that was nationwide, you would think that we have transitioned in the last 40 years of no longer the Caucasian male, that we have really increased the number of females, the number of minorities in the academy programs. And the realization is we've not made a whole lot of headway.
Mm.
And so you start looking at some of the data that's driven about the number of arrests on officers that are made, and we've not made a lot of headway in the last 40 years. And so we got to ask ourselves, are we just doing the same old thing over and over and over again? I think we've got to step back and say, hey, what is it that's making a difference and what is not working? What do we need to do differently? And ILEA and IADLIST are really taking a forward look at that, along with organizations like Noble. And I think you're seeing that push now to become more professional, to understand what it is that we can change in law enforcement. Yet, when I teach crisis intervention training at the academies, I know the curricula says, "Hey, look, this is a new approach, the crisis intervention training," and the realization is it's really not. And any of your listeners can go out there and truly just Google 1950s law enforcement training, mental health, New Orleans PD. And there's a video out there of a 1955 or 1956 training on how you deal with mental health issues. And while the tactics were poor, it just shows that even back in the 50s, we were looking at methods to address mental health crisis issues. Uh, so I think we just got to continue that approach. Hey, let's find something innovative. We test it, we try it. If it doesn't work, we move on, try something else. And I think that's what you're seeing is Texas has taken a lead in working with organizations such as IALIST and Noble and PERF and the others. And we really are a model organization. Not to say that there's not other good ones out there, because there are, but many of them turn to Texas and say, "Hey, how are you guys doing it? And what do we
Mhm.
need to adapt or adopt?" And you take a look, Texas has the benefit of having both the huge rural area as well as the huge urban areas. So we run the gamut. So if you got
Mhm.
a populace like New York, compare that to Houston, where it's a lot of high rises. And if you got the open plains of Kansas, just go out to West Texas or the Panhandle and talk to those
Yeah.
guys, because so many different components and aspects and styles of policing are necessary in Texas that other states don't experience. And I think that's a good opportunity for us. And we just need to seize on it and continue our growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, funny you mentioned it. Years and years ago, I was doing a mitigation investigation actually on a capital murder defendant, and I flew to New Jersey, and I was terrified. I boy from East Texas flew into New Jersey, Hoboken, New Jersey,
Mhm.
and I thought I'm going to go get me a cannoli first, and then I'm going to do my interview. I'm just trying to be a good cop, and I actually went to the police department, and on the elevator ride up, guy asked me where I'm from in Texas, and I sort of felt uncomfortably like a novelty. They kind of cornered me in the office and was asking me, "Do we ride horses?" He,
Yeah.
he he made a comment that my mustache wasn't that big, which I didn't know whether to be offended or not. And just sort of the novelties of Texas law enforcement. I mean, our Texas Ranger program is well known throughout the world, and so I've always been curious because, to your point, I think it's because we have so many applicants, and Mike could probably speak on this too because he's had a lot of vetting, but it does seem at times, I guess it's because the negative always outshines the positive in some ways. It seems like Texas has ways to grow in terms of our standards, but that's probably not the case. It seems that way only because what is storyline is however many officers get in trouble at TCOLE or whatever seems to outshine all the progress that we've made as a state and as a standard. Because I've been to other states too that police officers, not as professional, not as trained, in my opinion. And so I'm thankful for the insight there. Mike, did you have any questions about any of this side of it, or are you okay to? I want to move into more of the training realm, but I wanted to talk about his time at TCOLE. I had some specific stuff.
No, I don't have any specific things.
Okay.
I think one of the issues with maybe hiring is not that the standards aren't there. I think probably some agencies aren't quite living up to them or seeking that high bar that we want to see. But I think that's the case probably in a lot of professions as well. We have a model of what we want. Um, for whatever reason, sometimes people don't shoot for that higher level um, cadet, so to speak. But yeah, I think it's important that we do set those high standards, and maybe within the academy environment, I certainly don't want to be the gatekeeper for the agency that didn't do a great job, but maybe a little bit of that. I think sometimes we see the results of cadets coming into an academy program that maybe they're right there at the standard, but they're certainly not as high as they probably should be. But with that comes probably some of the struggles that you're going to see from those same recruits as far as their own little internal discipline, their ability to do well on exams, and because ultimately getting that license, I would say the vast majority want to take that license and go do something with it within a department. So, um, yeah, standards
I
are a
have a
big
question
deal.
for both of y'all, if you wouldn't mind on that. I wrote it either one. When it comes to that standard, both I know Malcolm and I know Mike. You have no problem with telling somebody, hey, this is just not a profession for you. Does that go to what you were just talking about, which is I don't think people realize how awesome our power is once you become a police officer. Once you get that power, how autonomous, because of Texas, our vastness, and a lot of officers have to be lone wolf a little bit. Is that why you don't have a problem telling a cadet, hey, you're just not, this is not for you?
I think there's a lot of I'll say kids because I'm older now. I can say kids. I think we have license to say that when we get past 50. But the you can be anything you want, I think is a lie. Because there are people I know. Just thinking back to when Malcolm was introducing, um, he was describing a calling, whether he used that word or not. And
Hmm.
but a calling is certainly a step in the right direction, but there are people that, as much as they may want to do this job, it's just not for them. And try to balance, because we can help you pass the academy, we can help you pass a licensing exam, but there's the other side of that for me too, is that doesn't necessarily mean we're doing a good job for the profession simply because we can help them get a peace officer's license. Because if they don't do well in field training, or they limp through field training and get into, actually being on their own, um, are they really going to be able to do the job safely, provide assistance when assistance is needed to be provided? And there's just so much to this whole thing about I want to be a police officer to actually becoming a really good police officer.
Well, I think you're spot on there. Kind of a couple of points to tap into there is today, well, when I was at TCOLE, I heard it as well. We just don't get the number of quality applicants to submit the application to become a police officer. Nobody wants to be a cop anymore. And when I came on in 77, I competed against 100 plus for every position that was available out there. And so we start looking back at what's the transition, what's the change. And I think there's a balance between the guardian and the warrior ethos. And are cops going to have the warrior ethos or the guardian ethos? And I don't think you can have one or the other. I think you have to have a combination of both that need to fit the situation that the officers are addressing at the time. And it has to truly incorporate community based policing. Now, I'm not talking about a program where the officer goes out and does a do good program with the community and everybody's happy, and the other officers are out there really creating some challenges from a professionalism standard. I think there has to be a warrior capability with a guardian attitude, if that makes any sense at all.
Absolutely.
And so when I was with TCO, I asked the agencies, I said, how are you drawing in your cadets? And they were doing everything that they could. But I noticed that El Paso PD was having absolutely no problem in filling their academy. And so I asked the coordinator there, I said, tell me, how are you able to fill your academy? I mean, my goodness, who wants to come to El Paso to become a police officer? And he said, we're somewhat isolated out here. People want to leave, they have to leave and go to a different city. He said, it's not like they can just drive to El Paso to become a cop. He says, so we grow our own. That was the term he used. We grow our own. So, what do you mean by that exactly? And he said, look, our officers become involved with the youth at a very young age, not just the DARE program and that kind of stuff, but they truly are involved in their lives, both on and off duty. And then they incorporate them through the school programs, and they have internships, and they inculcate them into other components, whether it be through telecommunications, through the jailer program, and they work with the Boy Scouts and the Explorers program. And so they're truly involved, especially those that are at risk. And they get them involved, and then they realize, hey, I think this is a career that could be for me. And it really does start at the ground root for the incorporation of an attitude amongst the youth. It's not going to be an overnight process. And I think those organizations that tap into that will develop it. You know, when you look at the fire service, the city of Arlington, Mansfield, they run through their high school programs, fire academies, so that the day you graduate high school, you can
Mm,
take the fire test.
yeah.
Why haven't we been doing that with police officers or telecommunicators or jailers? And we've argued that for a number of years. And what we're seeing now is that push to do exactly that. And so kudos to TCOLE and legislature for allowing that to happen. TCOLE was limited in what they could do because of the legislative limitations on getting into the academy. But now you're seeing that push to really transition so that it becomes an incorporation of the school's education and career development program, so it becomes a career, it becomes a profession, and I think you're gonna see more and more folks move into that, so
Yeah, it was definitely a limitation when I started law enforcement, close to 20 years ago now. I think my first starting salary was 19,500 bucks.
yeah, yeah.
I did get to take my old Crown Vic home, but I'd have to put a quart of oil in it when I started in the morning. And so, yeah, it wasn't a sexy job. It was a sexy career because of all the things that you was involved with the job. But I found out very, very soon I was more likely to chase a cow on foot than I was a person. I was more likely to treat a cardiac arrest than make an arrest. I mean, it was definitely more of that. And I patrolled Delta County by myself for the better part of my patrol career at night. I was the weekend night deputy is what they called us. And so that was the worst job you could have at the time. But
Mhm.
yeah, what it sounds like too, I mean, we could have a whole episode on community policing and legitimacy because that's something I love. But yeah, what you're talking about is officers. I think we of course, when we train our officers in our own program, we want them to know that actually what you're doing is policing is not, it's not necessarily about production on the officer's part. It's about helping others, empower them to police themselves in a meaningful way, not just do TikToks and you know promposals on the side of the road or whatever. I mean, officers' role there is not just public relations; it's the community policing side of things, which I'll save. I have a shameless segue into training because all the things that you're pointing out, you and Mike both, I think it has a remedy, and I think that remedy is training because for the longest time, I think training is a prophylactic. I've always felt like training and education is a prophylactic. And so, for both of you and Mike, if you wouldn't mind, because I've never asked Mike this, could you guys maybe define? Because I think there's a misconception on what training in law enforcement is. There's education, which I think is the macro, but training is how we get there. Would you guys care to sort of define the difference between education and training as it relates to law enforcement?
Well, I can give you the example I give in class. I don't know, it's more for laughs than anything, but I always ask if they have kids in school, and those that raise their hand, I ask them, well, while they're in school, would you rather they have sex education or sex training? And then everyone chuckles and says, well, I certainly don't want my kids to have training. I think training is outcomes based, functional, being able to take a concept and for law enforcement, use it in the field in a real world situation. Where education, all training has some education base. We could talk about a topic and yet not apply that topic. We can educate you on a search and seizure, but until you use it in practical applications and then ultimately use it in the field, I don't know how good you're going to be at search and seizure if we just leave it at education. Anybody can read um, the law books, and not to slight an attorney, but an attorney learns law in a classroom with maybe some mock trials and things like that. But police officers use it in real time and sometimes within seconds, where the courts can sit back for months or even years to scrutinize every single little misstep that might have occurred. Well, I'm going to pass that torch over to Malcolm, though, because I'm sure he has some insight as well.
Yeah, and I don't think, unlike what you're saying, training for me seems pedagogical. It's the what we must do, and it's the step by step of what we must do and what we have to do. And I think education, in many ways, is andragogical or pedagogical. Where we want to learn what we want to learn when we want to learn it. And it's really the why we do what we do. And so, and you can almost flip those. I think you can argue equally that education is what we do and the training becomes why we do it. And I think it's understanding that it's a full package. You can't have one without the other. I oftentimes in the class, when we're doing continuing education and I'm listening to the groaning, why do we have to do this? And, can't we just short circuit that? And I just ask them, if your doctor was doing a cardiac surgery on you, would you want them to have done the online training that they could just flip through and in a matter of an hour get 8 hours of training credit? Or do you want that cardiologist that is coming in and doing the skills test with a true standard that you have to pass? And that's a combination of both education and training. And those cardiologists that come in with the desire to truly learn and expand their training, that's the person I want to be hammering on my heart, that. And I
Yeah.
think it comes back to that same concept with police, and that's where we'll make our level of professionalism move forward.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I've long said that training is an active experience followed by a measurement, whereas education is similar, but it's usually a passive experience followed by a measurement. And what I mean by that is training. I think people need to kind of know the difference. Is when we come in and we're going to teach you arrest, search, and seizure training, the student should be prepared to be active and be up and ready to go. Whereas the educational part is when on that Friday or that following Monday, we're testing your level of education in that topic area and the accountability that you had as a student to study and to insert yourself into whatever topic area you're trying to master. On that, when Mike and I take a different approach to training, in some ways different. I don't want to get there just yet, if you don't mind, but what are your thoughts? I asked about training, but what are your thoughts on the most pressing gaps in modern training programs today as it relates to, academies or agencies? Do you have an opinion about the gaps in there?
Well, I think one of the big things is, and how do I describe this? Do I want somebody sitting in class and able to regurgitate the answers, or do I want them to be able to apply the skills in the real world? And I think oftentimes we fail to put out scenario based training where we take the training and then we apply it in scenario based in a safe environment where you can make errors. I think we just rely many times on regurgitate the material that we've heard, like we did in elementary and junior high school, as opposed to, hey, let's take it to a skills level base like we learn in college. And so I really, the sticky wicket and that kind of stuff that you guys are doing, I think is really going to make a positive difference in the profession. You approach it from the concept of, hey, let's learn about crisis intervention training, but let's learn how we make that apply in the real world. But it goes back to ethics. That's the same way. We teach ethics. Well, it's the right and wrong. I don't need to be taught right and wrong. Is that oftentimes the attitude that I get. And then I run that back to them and say, okay, let me run you through a challenge here and really recognize there's a difference. When we talk about ethics, it's not just the right and the wrong. It's when you have competing values that the challenge comes in for law enforcement. And the example that I give is the sweater that is knitted by your 80-year-old grandmother, and she sends it by mail to you, and you get it and you open it up, and it's maroon and chartreuse in color, one sleeve slightly longer than the other. And it's about 2 sizes too big for you. But she's hand knitted this thing over a 4-month time period. And just as you open it up, she calls and goes, Sonny, did you get the sweater? Well, yes, I did. Well, did you love it? Oh, I loved it. Loved it, Granny. Well, you just lied through your teeth. Well, your philosophy is you believe in telling the truth, but you also believe that you shouldn't hurt your grandmother, but you can only
Mm,
have one of those, so you have a competing value.
mm,
And it's oftentimes those conflicts that officers get into the street of, okay, is it loyalty or is it telling the truth or is it making the case to get the bad guy? And those competing values are when it comes to the real challenge. And so you use the ACT model. What are your alternatives and consequences when it comes time to tell your story? And if you use that ACT model that ILEA puts out and
mhm.
you plan in advance for these situations, man, when the time comes, the stress and the rubber meets the road, you will have an appropriate response ethically. But it goes back to firearms training. It goes back to physical skills training, takedown training, negotiation training, crisis intervention training. If you figure it out in advance and you practice it over and over and over again, it becomes second nature. And again, it's the professional level that we want to achieve out there as a direct result of applying that on a regular basis.
With the gaps question too, maybe I add, is there any ethical, I mean, well, other than we could probably spend a whole nother episode on just overcoming ethical problems in training. One of the questions that I have, and feel free to use it or not, but I see a lot of ethical issues in the mandatory training field. So when Mike and I do a mandatory training for the intermediate or whatever those mandatory trainings are, we do full stop. We get the guys up, we do a scenario, but I imagine as an example, what are some of those ethical issues in training that notwithstanding, people probably, shuffling people through classes and giving credit and all those things.
Well, that was one of the big things that Mike Dickey and I realized there at TCOLE is I was astounded at the number of unethical training programs that existed and how they taught them. At one institution, the instructor would bring them in and sit 12 people around the table, lay down a sign-in sheet, lay down, copy the PowerPoint and the test and the answers and say, I'll be back in 2 hours, and they come back in 2 hours and they pull up the test and the evaluation's filled out and everybody scored 100, and they scan through the PowerPoint and everything is good. And so we get 8 hours of training. That is not training. And so the ethical standards of the trainer was, hey, look, we do this stuff inside out every day. We don't need to be trained on it. It's just to meet the legislative mandates. So let's press forward. And it happens far more often than you would believe. Or you've got the online training where TCOLE had to identify those programs that were not allowing for the officers to actually engage the program or requiring them to engage the program before advancing to the next slide. And literally, you could go from one slide to the next, and as long as you clicked all the slides, it checked the box, then you took your test. You could take a 2 hour course in 15 minutes and get 2 hours training credit, but you really truly didn't know anymore. And I think what you've seen over the years is the transition away from that and holding to a higher standard. And I think as a profession, we have begun to do that as well. And I hope that trend continues.
Yeah, it's one of the things that Mike and I chatted about. I don't know, Mike, if you want to step in, but we're not just training you to get through it. We're trying to get you to understand maybe that I know this scenario in class sounds silly, or this whatever dilemma we're putting you in to solve, but it's not for now. It's not to appease TCOLE. It's for that small chance you're going to run into something that you'll know how to handle it. I mean, training is to build a plan in my head, at least. It's how you build a plan to handle things and to put yourself into situations.
You know what? When I teach the basic instructors course, one of the things I point out is that as an instructor, you're going to be challenged with your ethics. You're going to have
Mhm.
administrators that are saying, "Hey, look, we can't afford to have all these people come in and pay overtime, so we need to figure out a way to shortcut this or whatever." You're going to be challenged from an ethical perspective, and you got to be prepared for how you're going to respond to that. You're going to have that old head out there who been in it for 40 years. He knows everything like I do. And I got my attitude. And I'm sent to the back of the class. I'm here because TCOLE requires me to be here. And so you're not going to teach me anything. It's how do you overcome those challenges as an instructor? And I think the transitions in the program that we're seeing today are moving us forward and addressing that on the level that you guys are doing. I mean, you all are ahead of the game. This program and how you teach there at Hill are exemplary. And I wish that most of the academies would follow that concept. So kudos to you for that. But I'm seeing a positive move forward and across the state, and so that's kind of exciting for me.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we think we have an academy model that acts as both an active experience for our students, but also prepares them for that at least that first stage of FTO based. Our first initial reaction was kind of look at the brain and how the brain attacks things, and motivations and things of that nature. That was that was our original conversation. Was I actually came to him, just so you know, Malcolm, I came to him and I was sort of frustrated because I was teaching a class and I thought it was going great. And it's a night class, so it's a little unique, but not, you know, it's not different. It's still training. And after this class, I asked them to repeat something back or to start studying it, and they started complaining. And I wondered, because I thought every day in the academy was amazing. I couldn't believe that I was able to do that. I wondered why that motivation was so fleeting. Why that could, adults who decided to come to police academy didn't give 100%. And Mike and I started that conversation and we looked at it, and it had a lot to do with the way I was teaching, actually, is because I was up on the spotlight and I didn't engage much. And a lot of that had to do with self-auditing. And part of that, not to just segue all around, I'm not trying to, but I wonder, I have a list, Mike has a list, and everybody does, of the non-negotiables, things in training that cannot be compromised at all. For us, our non-negotiables, I think, Mike, if you want to step in, is to make sure the students are held to a standard. We do that through autonomy, relevance, and practical application. We've spoke about this many times on the podcast, and we'll continue to. But what are some of yours, Malcolm, some of your non-negotiables or some of your things that can't be compromised in training?
Well, one of the biggest things is ethics. You just don't compromise your ethics in training, period. I mean, full stop. You just don't do it. You give your whole effort in putting together the best program you can to educate that student and to give them the knowledge, skills, and ability to perform out there in the field. And the second one is safety. Don't compromise safety for the sake of training. You've got to keep that in the forefront. I'll tell you, there is nothing more rewarding than to get the call, whether from a cadet or an experienced officer, and say, hey, that stuff you taught me 2 weeks or 2 months ago, here's the situation. This is what just happened to me. And I got to tell you, what you taught me actually worked out there. And that gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling inside to know that, hey, not only did you make a difference, but you may have saved a life out there. So when you ask what are those things that can't be compromised, one is ethics and the second is safety. I think those are the two big ones for me. And then the third is, of course, do the best job you can, give it your all every time you step in front of that group. Don't go in half-hearted. Just commit to it. If you're not committed, turn it over to somebody else that wants to be.
Yeah, even it sounds like your non-negotiable is also mine, is, despite, well, one, I think Texas has a lot of instructors. I think a lot of those instructors, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't speak on behalf of anybody other than Walt, but I think a lot of that has to do with the resume tick instead of the desire to want to actually teach and be involved in that. I see a lot of pressure in the training realm from leadership, whether it's to water training down to get guys through it, or the second one is, well, Walt screwed up. He searched somebody's trunk without a warrant and without, probable cause. So now all of our guys need training in that realm. If you were to, being the king of the day, this is a hypothetical, but if you could change the motivation to want to train, what would be your key characteristic that you could insert a chip into everybody's brain that wants them to train? Is it, we need to respond to things that happen ill in our profession, or should we have a certain amount of hours a week? What would be that sort of motivation for you?
Well, I don't know that I've really considered that, but off the top of my head, there's a couple of things that step up. One is to encourage a calculated risk and to encourage them to engage new ideas. Try to approach things from a perspective that they may have never thought about before. And if it works, fine. If it doesn't, then you come back and reevaluate. There's three books that kind of step out, or three things that kind of step out, and one is a book called Leadership by Attila the Hun. And when you read the book, you realize that Attila took care of his people. He made sure that the lower rung got fed the best and they had their uniforms and they had the equipment necessary, as opposed to, hey, I've made rank and now I get all these special privileges. You understood a different leadership perspective. And I think that applies in the classroom as well for instructors. And the second one is the five dysfunctions of a team. When you look at Leoncini's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and you realize what it takes to put together a functional team, whether it's a shift squad, whether it's a training cadre of educators, that book really was an eye opener for me. And then the third was journal. Journal for yourself. You talked about earlier self analysis, self awareness, self reflection. And I think in reading through the journal, I oftentimes self reflect. It's not been but, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, I was accustomed to receiving grade evaluations at the end of every course I taught. In this one particular course, I was hammered. And it was like, wow, maybe they didn't realize who it was really teaching. Maybe this is the wrong evaluation. But I looked and no, sure enough, it had my name on it. It's like, wow,
Wow.
I got to step back and take a look at how I approached the program. And the next time I presented the program, I'd made the change. So it's don't be afraid to step out there and put yourself on the line, but don't be afraid to say, hey, I made an oops and I gotta fix it here. Just
Yeah.
own up and just move forward.
Yeah. And do you think how can instructors sharpen their ethical compass a little bit? I mean, should it be something we talk about more in basic instructor, or is there a better vetting? I'm not sure.
No, and I appreciate you asking that question. This is near and dear to my heart, and I truly believe that we should be incorporating ethics not as a program specifically, but as inculcation in every training program that we do. We have courses on how to be ethical. Well, that's great, but what about the competing values I talked about earlier? Why can't we, or why shouldn't we, incorporate an ethical dilemma in our basic firearms qualification training every year? When you present, hey, you had a bad shoot. You thought that this was a weapon, and it really was a wadded up sock that the guy was pulling out of his pocket at the time. And you see him lay down a blade. What are you going to do at that moment? You got a minute and a half before your partner is
Mhm.
going to arrive on the scene. What are you going to do in this situation, knowing that you're going to full well be in a real challenge situation? Incorporate those into every component. What do you do when you're doing your crisis intervention training or your domestic violence training? Incorporate some component of an ethical challenge and make that student think through the process and then use that ACT model of determining what are my alternatives? What are the consequences for each of those alternatives? And when the truth comes to the light of day and you got to tell your story, what is it you're going to say? By incorporating that ethics into the training, that process of identifying the ACT model and what your options are and why it's so important to make a good ethical decision, I think is paramount. You can't just teach an ethics course. If that were the case, we'd just go to church one Sunday a week. I mean, one Sunday a month or one Sunday a year. And hey, we're good for a lifetime. Well, I went to church once. I don't need to go back. I've had the ethics training. I don't need the ethics training again. The reality is, we have to keep pressuring ourselves to say we got to do good, we got to do right. And if we've done wrong, mea culpa, mea culpa. Let's move forward. Let's make the change. Let's ask for forgiveness, and let's do it right the better and the next time. So,
Right. Right.
um,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one of the I guess maybe for me, I've been an instructor for as long as I can remember. It was a part of my duties as a investigator at the DA's office, actually, and I would say uniquely, my boss required us to go around and teach Brady training, which I thought I did
Mhm.
something wrong, to have to go do that. But actually, it was very successful in Waller County, at least. In after the Sandra Bland case, especially, we increased from Brady to traffic stops to citizen encounters, and it was very effective. And I think that that's one of the things, if I could be the king of the day and change, is if I could plug a microchip into somebody's head that gives them the motivation to teach selflessly, to leave a legacy. My dad used to tell me that the reason he had hard lessons is so that way I wouldn't have such a hard time later. And I
Yeah.
used to love that phrase. And so, yeah, we're a little bit tough in our classes. We get our guys going, but it's for the best. Um,
Let me just say a little something along that line. Your dad was obviously a wise man. And Dr. Roger Taylor said that in many cases, the teacher should be a guide on the side instead of a sage on the stage.
mm.
And I think if we approach it from that perspective, then we have done the profession a much better job.
Yeah. Well, and for both of you, Mike's talked about it. I'd like to know is on that same, what are, for our listeners that are instructors, what are some of those characteristics of an instructor, since you kind of opened that up? Because I feel like there's a lot of sage on the stage, unfortunately, still. So what are some of those characteristics, Mike, if you want to add to, of a really good instructor in that realm, in your opinion?
Someone that'll leave their ego at the door and not make it all about them. Um,
Amen.
like you see that a lot, from introductions to how they kind of work their way through the class. And if you make it all about you, then you're leaving no room for it to be about the student. Um, I think we've mentioned before, you can be an expert in your topic and you can be an expert presenter, but you actually have to be able to help the student hang on to that material, use the material, whether it's search and seizure in the field or force in the field or really anything. That would probably be the biggest thing is if we can set the ego aside, it's still going to be rewarding. Everybody wants to feel good when they teach. They want to feel good that they're helping someone hang on to information. So I think that's the biggest thing for me. And and I know I say this a lot probably in several previous episodes, but it's kind of a hiring standard. A simple question for me is, hey, what would you like to teach? And if I get well, you tell me I can really teach anything, I'm not interested. I'm just not. I want somebody that has that passion about the topic. They are truly an expert in the topic, and they're willing to make the class about the student and the outcome over making themselves look good and feel good and have a fancy PowerPoint. And if they can't teach it at the board without the PowerPoint, yeah.
Mhm.
Again, another one I'm not overly interested in. I get it. I mean, we like audio visual, because it opens up, I guess, a different part of the brain. But
Mhm.
um, I gauge the expert on, do you really need those notes? Do you really need that PowerPoint, or can you come in and teach the topic, um, like literally at the marker board?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to recognize if you leave your ego at the door, you realize it's okay to not know the answer to a question that's posed in class. So many instructors, so many times seen, they will literally come up on the fly, make up an answer, and it's wrong.
Hmm.
It's okay to admit as an instructor, I don't know. And then the second thing is kind of dovetailing off of that is use the resources that are in your room. There are folks in that class that are far more skilled and experienced at you in some components, and they could be teaching this class. Tap into that resource.
Hmm.
Let them be a part of that overall training program, and that opens up a positive attitude for the other students, and they're much more willing to learn because they see, hey, this is advantageous to me as a student, not just the instructor. So yeah, I think by leaving your ego at the door, recognizing it's okay to not know, and then use those resources in the room are the three top things that I'd pick on. So
Well, thank you all for adding that. Yeah, I remember I was teaching a basic instructor years ago, and you were doing an audit of, or an evaluation rather, of the Parker County Sheriff's Department. I was teaching there, and a guy asked a question that I didn't know. And Mike can tell you, it's sickening to some degree how much I try to use humor because I'm not good at it. But I told him, have you ever heard of a book? Why don't we look at that together? We can look at a
Mhm.
book.
Mhm.
I'm not going to do the work for you. And you had mentioned that that you appreciated adults having to be involved in class because I'm not up there just to talk at you. I'm up there to talk with you and help you through. So I appreciate it. On that, I know Mike's got to hit the road here pretty soon. He's going to Corpus Christi. So because I could spend all day doing this, I have some, if you don't mind, some police training HQ specific questions, if you would tackle a couple. When did you become aware of what Mike and I were doing? I know that I had reached out to you and let you know that we're trying to put together a sort of a business model that helps students in the class, but also with our podcast and stuff.
Yeah, I do recall the conversation that you and I had about that, and I wanted to take the opportunity to listen in. And once I listened to that first podcast, I was hooked. And I got to tell you, as I said at the beginning of this podcast here, you guys are onto something because you are tapping into the resources that are out there. And I have learned so much in listening to your podcast from other speakers, other guests that you've had on, and I have seized on many of the things that they've said to incorporate into the programs that I present. So I think your pooling together of all that wealth and knowledge out there is so beneficial. And for you to take the risk to do that, for me, just really stands out. And I applaud you in it. You're definitely on the right track.
Thank you.
I know, Walt, you're data driven. And I'll tell you, the data speaks for itself in your academy program. And you and I have talked many times about the data analysis, and we use that in the Noble presentation.
Mhm.
But the fact that it's data proven that your approach in training at the academy is good. And I think the data that you're going to see from your podcast are going to be equally good. So, again, kudos to you guys for taking that risk because I think your rewards will be immense for it.
Yeah, we see a bit of that. Mike and I had a good conversation about the advanced instructor and sort of, you know, I know it's an evaluation presentation at the end, but I often wonder what was advanced about that, and so Mike and I really we honed in and we thought there's got to be a way to teach adults to where retention is at the forefront without being gimmicky, or novelty. And I think you're right. I think we've tapped into something that, as you mentioned with the police videos from 1950s, we're not inventing a wheel. We're just daring to be a little bit different, just a smidge.
Walt, and I always try to come up with these little nuggets and things that you really spur on. Um, I'm not sure, but what the incorporation of an audit component, a TCOLE audit or evaluation component into that advanced course or even the basic course, wouldn't it be beneficial overall for them to understand the importance of TCOLE being a partner, not just a regulatory agency, but being a true partner
Mm,
in the training, but likewise realizing, hey, there is a good benefit to these assessments or evaluations. That's why we do the evaluations of the instructor at the end of each course. And what happens if we had a mock assessment or mock evaluation
mm.
using that check sheet that TCOLE provides to training coordinators? Maybe that's something that I need to look into on the programs that I present. Those kind of ideas that you spur because of this podcast, I think are the things that are going to make a difference in the profession.
Mike, do you have anything to say on that, or as far as the additions, or
No, I think it's a great idea. I mean, a lot of folks, they don't really understand kind of maybe behind the scenes or behind the curtains is what needs to happen. Um, we kind of brush past, I think, just liability or liability reduction, but just understanding maybe the why we want solid lesson plans, why we want to track, attendance, why we want to have measurable learning objectives. It's, in my view, it's for the thing we don't want to happen, but is entirely possible that we teach a topic and the person who was in our class applies it, maybe properly, maybe improperly, but it's a big deal when an officer gets involved in a force situation, especially a deadly force situation, and we start backtracking to training. It's like, how were they trained? Where were they trained? Did they attend all the days of the training? And I know for a lot of people, bookkeeping, so to speak, is not high on their list, but it certainly should be. I think absolutely exploring that topic. And I like Malcolm's idea of almost the mock sort of evaluation would probably prove beneficial, and especially for those who they're going to end up in training coordinator roles or academy director roles, is just some broader insight as to that whole sort of process. I know there's the dread, Malcolm or Mike's coming out to evaluate your program, and everyone is scrambling to, make sure their, T's are crossed and I's are dotted. But just, and I'll go back to kind of what I was talking about really early in this. The big takeaway I got from working from Malcolm is if the system's there and you kind of follow that, you don't have to worry about who shows up or when they show up. It's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of understanding that process, I think is could be of huge benefit to the trainer, to the evaluator, or I mean the coordinator. Sorry. So yeah, I think it absolutely should be something we stick in, probably both basic and advanced.
I
Sorry, I'm
agree.
rambling, but I mean,
No, and it's
it's I
not.
think a
No,
great idea.
I do too. Yeah, I love that. That's great. And you mentioned earlier, one, I appreciate you saying that about our work, and we spend a great deal of time trying to figure out the best way to train adults, which is important. We know that you can train children, but we're training adults. Do you think that, I mean, and honestly, putting you on the spot, do you think that we could potentially in the future contribute to helping kind of guide TCOLE or whatever in developing some of these techniques in the basic academy?
Absolutely. And I think one of the best involvements is to get on some of those committees at TCOLE and to stay engaged with your field service agent. By interacting with the FSA on a regular basis, you get the opportunity to provide input. The FSA is able to take that back to headquarters and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing in the field. So by having that relationship with the FSA first, the second off is get involved with the committees at TCOLE. Submit your resume and your application to become one of those committee members, and then actively participate. Join the various organizations, whether it's IATLIS or the TCAA. There's so many cops and there's so many instructors that don't think that they need the TDCAA, the Texas District and County Attorneys Association, but it's a very inexpensive
Mm-hmm.
membership, and you are learning what the defense is attacking from the cop's perspective and what we're doing inappropriately or incorrectly, or that we could do more of or differently to be successful in our profession. It's get involved in those organizations, whether it's Noble or ILEA or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Get involved and stay involved. I can't say enough about don't feel ashamed to be participatory in things outside your comfort zone. I know there's a whole program we could do on PTSD and that sort of thing, but I got to tell you, it goes back to the old see something, say something. And if there's something going wrong in your organization when it comes to training, you got to speak up. And I think if you do that, it's going to have a statewide impact. But your involvement with your FSA and your involvement in organizations that truly engage the program at TCOLE will have a positive effect in the long run. Like I told you, you just bring to the attention of TCOLE the issue for the licensure versus the academy entrance. And that one phone call that I made a difference statewide on
Mm-hmm.
the components to get into the class. So you can make a difference, and you should make a difference as part of the profession.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I don't want to speak for Mike, but I think that that personally is one of my goals is to see a sharper academy program where, for instance, one of my things is I think we could actually look at trimming some of the topics a little bit, and then making that mandatory for later, and then kind of focusing in on more of the ethics training, more of the EQ training, and then partner that with more of the physical skills, and I think you'd have a better product. But that's for another time. In fact, I was going to invite you back for 2 additional episodes on lesson plans and learning objectives, but also academy specific stuff. If you would be so kind to join us again at some point.
Well, absolutely, I'd be honored. And well, let me say this to you and Mike both. I would hope that you all would engage the new artificial intelligence component, because what I'm seeing when I teach basic instructor is a reliance on AI to write the lesson plans for them, and the inaccuracy of the information out there is going to result in officers getting hurt, because we're teaching stuff that AI is putting out there that's not accurate. So AI has a role and it has a good benefit, but I think we've really got to get ahead of the program on AI and technology. Uh, Law enforcement so many years has been behind in technology, and we're behind the curve on everything from fraud investigations to ATM scams and that sort of thing, and we still have never caught up, and we don't want to get behind on AI. So whatever you guys can do to bring that to the forefront, I think is beneficial to the profession as well. But yeah, I'd be honored to come back and listen to you and talk with you and share thoughts and ideas, and certainly as I said, any of the listeners want to engage me on a personal or private basis, feel free to do so. I'll jump on that Harley Davidson and ride where I need to go. I tell everybody I keep a pocket full of cash and a go bag ready and a truck full of gas, man, and I'll always hop on that Harley and ride wherever I need to engage a discussion. So I'm
It's
there for
awesome.
you.
Well, and open invitations to our training. Before we sort of start to wrap, I wanted to mention something to you as well. So Mike and I, well, I should say you mentioned you feel like after the academy there should be a mandatory survey, and I thought that that was such a great idea. Mike actually took and made a survey, but it's for instructional methods. So we're
Mhm.
going to pump out surveys after every class. And it's an instructional method survey to officers, to students in the academy, to even instructors. He has a component about what methods they feel like is best. Because as I mentioned to you before, Mike and I were actually selected for the TCOLE conference to present. We don't know what day,
Oh,
but
excellent. Good
yeah.
deal.
So we're gonna talk, I guess, an hour on our autonomy, relevance, and practical application. And so we're gonna use some of that data for September, and I'm wondering if you can help push that out as well. Mike, that was such an amazing survey. I'm so bad at making surveys. I thought that was such a good one.
No, Walt, we've said that for years. The whole group there at TCC discussed that is that TCOLE should be the kind of the impetus for that. After a year or so, there should be a survey mandated by every new licensee to say, what is it that you see now, having been out there in the field in the real world for a year, that you wished you had been taught that wasn't taught, or that had been taught differently than what the guidelines mandate for you to have been more successful in the program? How can we make changes? And that's getting down to the folks that are using it on a daily basis. And I think it'll be an eye opener, and I think it'll have a huge impact. Great undertaking, but I think, again, data driven, use the analysis and then build from that.
Like I wasn't sure if you're gonna add. I'm sorry. I think I stepped on you.
No, just interested to see what the feedback is from, and it's for current students, former students, and instructors, just sort of their view on how they were taught and whether they thought it was effective from an instructor point of view, how they traditionally present, and whether or not they're measuring it for effectiveness. So I'm excited to see some of the data start to pour in so we can comb through that and maybe have some real-time fresh data come September.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I think putting that information into our presentation will make it even better for the September conference. Um, yeah, well, I think that's I could go all day, Malcolm. I thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Mike, do you have any parting words before I kind of give our last script? Or
No, again, I'm just appreciative that Malcolm took some time to come on here with us, and it's nice to catch up face to face. About the only time we see Malcolm, I think, is at the TCOLE conference. And so although this is an audio recording, we can all look at one another while it's recording. So yeah, it's nice to see the friendly face every now and then.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you equally, and thank you for supporting what we're doing. We'll keep sharpening it. I'll keep bothering you with emails and text, I'm sure at an inappropriate hour, and inconveniently. And the invitation's open, so we have a training calendar out. Love to have you stop in on any class you'd like.
Well, I've always said that I retired from the agency and not from the profession. I like to keep my hands dabbling in it all the time. It's just a passion for me for this profession, and I just can't get enough of it. It's been that way my entire career. But I appreciate that open opportunity to come up and watch and learn from you guys, because it's the student has become the master, is my perspective on you two and the other from TCC. That's truly, truly what I mean. But yeah, as I move forward in fighting crime and suppressing evil in my never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way, I always want to learn more, and so I can do it better.
Well, I'll share with you after. I'll share with you the calendar, and like I said, we're open. And speaking of the calendar, Mike and I have a basic instructor that still has seats available. It's in July the 14th at Weatherford Police Department. They've been kind enough to host us. There's still seats available. Visit our website, contact us, policetraininghq.com, info@policetraininghq.com. And if you need anything from us, that's how you can get a hold of us. But we are taking requests for training. We've got a whole slew, and Mike, we've expanded our catalog beyond to include things like deaf and hard of hearing training, as well as some of the mandated training for the August cycle as well.
Yeah, lots coming up at South Lake. You are looking for instructor, advanced instructor, crime scene, a new supervisor. Those are on the calendar through January of next year. If you're in need of some training, or you want to attend one of our instructor development courses, jump on there and sign up and come see us.
Well, thank you again. We'll go ahead and wrap this up, but thank you again, Malcolm. Mike, safe travels to Corpus Christi. Stay sharp, train hard.